I simply cannot find her.
Maria?
She's missing from the Abbey again.
Perhaps we should have put a cowbell around her neck.
I have looked everywhere, in all of the usual places.
Considering that it's Maria, I suggest you look in some place.
In 1964, during the filming of The Sound of Music, a single sound brought chaos to the set and nearly destroyed one of the film's most iconic scenes. It wasn't dramatic or tragic. It was funny, so funny that no one could stay in character. Take after take was ruined. The studio spent thousands trying to fix it, and in the end they chose to bury the story completely. For decades it stayed hidden, until Julie Andrews finally revealed the truth on live television. What really happened in that gazebo? And why did Christopher Plummer, who famously disliked the film, agree to keep quiet? The story itself had begun quietly in the mid-1950s. In 1956, German producer Wolfgang Lieberneiner released two films based on Maria von Trapp's memoir, the story of the Trapp family singers. The first was Die Trapp Family, followed by a sequel a year later. Though low budget, sentimental, and distinctly European in tone, they struck a chord. In post-war West Germany, audiences craved uplifting stories full of hope, and the Trapp films delivered exactly that. They became the biggest box office successes in the country at the time, and their charm quickly spread throughout Europe and even into South America, where people across languages and cultures connected with the image of a musical Austrian family standing up to the Nazis and choosing love over fear. But when the films were shown to Hollywood studios, the reaction was far from enthusiastic. To American eyes, they looked like high school productions, too sentimental, too corny, and too foreign. No one wanted to adapt the story for the U.S. screen. That changed when Vincent J. Dunhue, a Tony Award-winning director with a sharp eye for moving stories, happened to screen the German films while scouting new projects at Paramount. His first impression matched Hollywood's, clumsy and awkward, but then he noticed something more. Beneath the outdated style, he saw real heart. Dunhue made a bold suggestion no one else had considered. You can't make this a film. You have to turn it into a Broadway musical, for Mary Martin. That single statement flipped the switch and set off a chain reaction that would eventually create one of the greatest musicals in history. But none of it would have been possible had Maria von Trapp not made a very unusual, and some might say terrible, business decision years earlier. Maria von Trapp was no Hollywood insider. Without agents or lawyers to guide her, she agreed to sell the rights to her life story to German filmmakers in the early 1950s for a one-time payment of just $9,000. Even in 1950s money, it wasn't much, about $104,000 in today's terms, a decent sum for a quick deal, but a fraction of what was to come. Worse still, she had unknowingly signed away far more than she realized. Later, when Hollywood came calling, they tried to buy only the title of her book in hopes of skirting the rights issues and making a story merely inspired by her life. But Maria refused. If a family story was going to be told, it had to be told truthfully and in full, with no cherry-picking. By the late 1950s, Broadway star Mary Martin and her husband, Richard Halliday, were determined to bring the Von Trapp story to the stage. The only problem was they couldn't find Maria. She was deep in the jungles of Papua New Guinea doing missionary work with Father Franz Wozner, the Trapp's longtime musical director. With no phones or internet, only handwritten letters could reach her, and Maria often didn't even open them. Each time they arrived at a new mission post, piles of mail awaited her, including letters from the Martins about Broadway. She tore them up. Maria wasn't interested in show business. She was devoted to serving remote villages, running clinics, teaching music, and living simply. Fate intervened when she and Father Wozner returned to the U.S. by ship, docking in San Francisco. Waiting at the pier was Richard Halliday himself, who handed Maria 2 tickets to see his wife perform in Annie Get Your Gun. Out of politeness, Maria agreed to attend. What she saw on stage stunned her. Mary Martin was radiant, powerful, and magnetic. Maria was moved, but she still had bad news. She had already sold the film rights to the Germans. Still, she surprised the couple by giving them a small green light. "You're welcome to give it your best shot," she told them. That single, casual blessing launched one of Broadway's greatest legends. At first, producers planned a modest approach. Blend traditional Austrian folk songs, the real music the Trapp family performed in concert, with just a handful of new tunes to tie the story together. A touch of Broadway flair sprinkled over old European charm. But when Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein were approached to write only one or two songs, the legendary duo went much further. They didn't hold back. Rodgers and Hammerstein basically said, "Thanks, but no thanks. Either we write the whole thing, or we're out." They didn't want their work clashing with old Austrian ballads. It was all or nothing, and that moment changed everything. The producers hit pause while Rodgers and Hammerstein finished Flower Drum Song, shelving the Von Trapp project temporarily. But when they finally returned, they rewrote the entire concept from scratch, with all original songs. And not just any songs, but timeless classics like My Favorite Things, Duri Mai, Edelweiss, and Climb Iviawai Mountain, melodies the world still sings today. On November 16, 1959, opening night arrived at the Luntfontein Theatre on Broadway, with Mary Martin as Maria and Theodore Bickel as Captain Von Trapp. The production cost $400,000 to stage, a hefty sum back then. But the buzz was electric. Ticket sales exploded, eventually raking in over $232 million in advance bookings alone, an almost unimaginable figure for the time. Mary Martin barely took a day off, missing only one performance throughout the run. The show went on for 1,443 performances, nearly 4 years, before closing in June 1963. But by the summer of 1960, another storm was brewing, a bidding war for the movie rights. Studios recognized this wasn't just a Broadway hit. It was a phenomenon. 20th Century Fox came out on top, paying $1.25 million for the rights, equivalent to over $13 million today. It was a shocking gamble for a studio still reeling from the disaster of Cleopatra, which had gone $15 million over budget. Many thought Fox was crazy, but their contract included one overlooked clause. If the movie grossed more than $12.5 million, Rodgers and Hammerstein's estate would earn 10% of the profits. Co-writer Howard Lindsay literally laughed at the idea, certain it would never happen. He couldn't have been more wrong. Then came one of Hollywood's biggest what-ifs. By the early 1960s, Julie Andrews had already conquered the stage with a beloved performance as Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady on Broadway. Her voice was dazzling, her charm undeniable. But when Hollywood adapted the musical into a film, the studio executives claimed she wasn't camera-ready, not glamorous enough for the big screen. Instead, they cast Audrey Hepburn, who was elegant but couldn't sing like Julie. Most of her songs had to be dubbed. The snub devastated Andrews. She had carried My Fair Lady for years, only to be passed over when it mattered most. Yet fate intervened. Around the same time, director Robert Wise was searching for someone to play Maria Von Trapp in The Sound of Music. At first, he wasn't convinced Andrews was right for the part, until someone at Disney showed him an unfinished cut of Mary Poppins. Just minutes in, Wise turned to his screenwriter and said, "Let's sign her before anyone else does." Andrews was offered the role for a flat $225,000, about $2.28 million today. But Fox gave her no royalties, no bonuses, and no share of the box office. Once she cashed that check, that was it. Meanwhile, Mary Martin, who had played Maria on stage, earned more than $8 million from her share of Broadway profits. Fox, still underestimating Andrews, didn't think she was a big enough star to deserve a back-end deal. That decision would haunt them. Not only did Mary Poppins become a smash hit, but Andrews won the Oscar for Best Actress. When she accepted, she cheekily thanked Jack Warner, the very man who had rejected her for My Fair Lady. The audience roared with delight. And then came The Sound of Music, the role that would forever define her career. Even though the film went on to earn hundreds of millions worldwide, Julie never saw a single dollar beyond her flat fee. But Andrews wasn't the only casting gamble. Finding her on-screen partner proved difficult. The role of Captain George Von Trapp, a handsome, brooding widow who falls in love with Maria, seemed like a dream part, yet no major actor wanted it. Robert Wise tried everyone. Sean Connery, fresh off his James Bond fame, Richard Burton, known for his intensity, even Bing Crosby. None fit the tone or spirit of the film. Some declined outright, others just weren't right. Finally, Christopher Plummer entered the picture. Classically trained and elegant, Plummer had the gravitas, but he hated the script. Behind the scenes, he mockingly called it The Sound of Mucus and turned down the role several times. Playing a stiff, joyless father in a sugary musical didn't appeal to him. But Robert Wise believed in him enough to fly to London and convince him in person. Plummer relented. On one condition, the character had to change. He insisted Captain Von Trapp needed more depth, more heart, and stronger dialogue. And most importantly, a song of his own to reveal his emotional side. That's how Edelweiss was born. Contrary to popular belief, it isn't an old Austrian folk tune. Rogers and Hammerstein wrote it specifically for Plummer's character, giving the stern captain a gentle moment of vulnerability that transformed him into one of cinema's most memorable fathers. The idea behind Christopher Plummer's role as Captain Von Trapp was to give the character a quiet, personal moment of vulnerability, but even with adjustments, Plummer struggled. He later admitted to drinking through parts of the shoot, and during the family's intense farewell performance to the Nazis, he was actually drunk, something he claimed helped him loosen up for the stiff role. Still, his performance worked, bringing dignity and restraint to the captain's transformation from cold disciplinarian to loving father, a shift that audiences embraced wholeheartedly. Ironically, Plummer had a flat contract with no royalties or back-end deal, just like Julie Andrews, meaning both stars only walked away with a paycheck while the film went on to gross over $286 million worldwide. As the adults dealt with contracts and rewrites, the younger cast members faced their own chaos. Casting the Von Trapp children was grueling, with fierce competition. MIA Farrow auditioned 3 times for Liesel, but the casting note dismissed her as sweet, but no spark, paving the way for Charmian Carr, then 21, to play the 16-year-old role with a confidence that lit up the screen. Farrow's loss, however, opened the door to her. Breakout in Rosemary's Baby. For Friedrich, even a young Kurt Russell auditioned, alongside Patty Duke and Terry Garr, but the part ultimately went to Nicholas Hammond, whose calm intensity won over the director. Hammond would later make history as the first live-action Spider-Man in 1977. The rest of the Von Trapp children were carefully chosen, and over the decades, their role-life bond endured, with cast reunions and friendships lasting well into adulthood, even keeping ties with Andrews and Plummer. That sense of family translated on screen, and was one reason the film became a phenomenon. By 1966, The Sound of Music dethroned Gone with the Wind as the highest-grossing film in history, selling over 283 million tickets worldwide, nearly 1 in 12 people alive at the time. Without modern marketing, its reach was astonishing. Audiences around the globe hummed Dürre Mai and knew Edelweiss, even in villages without electricity. Its box office dominance was matched at the Academy Awards, where it won 5 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director for Robert Wise, proving the film was more than a fluffy musical. It was art. Yet behind the scenes, chaos lingered, most infamously during the iconic gazebo love scene between Maria and the captain. Massive carbon arc lights meant to simulate moonlight emitted noises that sounded like loud, wet raspberries every time Plummer leaned in to kiss Andrews, reducing the actors and crew to helpless laughter through nearly 20 takes. In the end, Wise scrapped the original plan and shot the scene in silhouette against glowing gazebo windows, turning a technical disaster into one of the most romantic visuals in movie history. What audiences saw as dreamy artistry was, in truth, damage control, one of many behind-the-scenes secrets the studio worked hard to keep under wraps. Cast and crew were warned not to mention the noises, the laughter, or the failed takes, and for years, fans believed the gazebo love scene had gone off without a hitch. The truth only came out decades later, when Julie Andrews finally told the story on a talk show. She laughed, recalling, "It's very hard to be nose-to-nose doing a love scene and having these awful raspberries coming at you from below." But while audiences chuckled at the story, few knew that Christopher Plummer was carrying a much heavier secret. Behind his calm, stoic screen presence, he was deeply unhappy. Plummer despised the sound of music, mocking it as gooey, calling it the sound of mucus, and even dismissing it in interviews as S&M. He felt the film was overly sentimental and far removed from the serious, challenging roles he wanted. Isolating himself during filming in Salzburg, he once described the picturesque city as a prison of sentimentality. Much of his unhappiness was self-inflicted. He drank heavily, gained weight, and later admitted that several scenes were filmed while he was 3 sheets to the wind. One of those moments was, ironically, the most emotional scene in the entire movie, Captain Von Trapp singing Edelweiss with tears in his eyes. Audiences saw it as heartfelt, But Plummer later revealed in his 2008 memoir In Spite of Myself that he was completely drunk during filming, calling himself a young and arrogant bastard with no real connection to the film's sentimental tone. And yet, somehow, he delivered a performance that moved millions. The irony deepened when it was revealed that most of his singing wasn't even his own. For the high notes and extended vocal parts, producers brought in professional singer Bill Lee, best known for his work in Disney films like Sleeping Beauty and Mary Poppins. While Plummer's speaking voice was used for transitions and dialogue, Lee carried the heavy lifting in songs like Edelweiss. Plummer was furious, feeling the decision undermined his performance, but most audiences never noticed. Lee's voice blended seamlessly enough that fans believed for decades they were hearing Plummer. By the time the movie premiered, he was so annoyed he could barely say its name without rolling his eyes, though in later years he admitted the film had charmed him after all. Still, while Plummer wrestled with his demons, other dangers on set were all too real. During the lake scene where the Vaughn-trapped children's boat tips over, 5-year-old Kim Carafe, who played Little Gretel, nearly drowned. Andrews had been told beforehand that Carafe couldn't swim and had planned to grab her immediately as the boat went over, but she fell backward instead of forward, leaving the child to slip under twice before another actor pulled her out. Carafe vomited lake water and developed a lifelong fear of swimming, while Andrews later called it one of the scariest moments of the shoot. Even she wasn't immune to physical mishaps. The film's iconic opening shot, Andrews twirling in a mountain meadow with arms outstretched, looked idyllic, but in reality, a helicopter had to fly just 20 feet above her to capture the aerial sweep. Each pass sent a blast of rotor wash so strong it repeatedly knocked her flat into grass. She was slammed down half a dozen times, forced to get up, brush herself off, and smile as though nothing had happened, later joking that she was nearly launched out of Austria. Filming in Salzburg may have looked like a dream on screen, with rolling hills, fairy-tale castles, and lush meadows, but behind the beauty was a nightmare of exhaustion, danger, and ballooning costs. What began as an already hefty $8.2 million production spiraled into a far more chaotic and demanding shoot than anyone had anticipated. No one warned the crew that Salzburg had some of the worst weather in Europe, and 1964 turned out to be one of the wettest years on record. Director Robert Wise originally thought location shooting could be wrapped up in 6 weeks, but it ended up taking 11. Rain delays brought everything to a standstill, leaving over 250 cast and crew members sitting around in soggy clothes, wasting time and driving up costs. Hotel rooms, equipment repairs, extra meals, and rising wages burned through the budget quickly. With Fox still reeling from the financial disaster of Cleopatra, this cheerful little musical was suddenly threatening to blow up just as badly. One nervous studio inside even whispered, "This movie might be the end of us." But before Wise even entered the picture, there had been an even bigger shakeup behind the scenes. The original director had walked away. Long before Robert Wise was hired, legendary director William Wyler was supposed to helm The Sound of Music. In early 1963, he even quit his spot on Fox's board to avoid a conflict of interest, showing how serious his involvement looked. But Wyler had doubts from the start. He didn't like the stage musical, didn't feel connected to the script, and when he flew to New York to see the Broadway show, he left unimpressed, saying the songs didn't feel natural and didn't fit the story. On top of that, Wyler was beginning to lose his hearing, something his wife could clearly see was making the idea of directing a musical even harder. Quietly, he began looking for a way out. That opportunity came when producers offered him The Collector, based on John Fowles' dark and twisted psychological novel. Wyler instantly felt it was more his style. He asked the Zanuck family, who ran the studio, to release him from his Sound of Music contract. The official story was scheduling conflicts. That's what the press was told, and what Fox repeated. But the truth was simpler. Wyler had run the other way. That exit left the door wide open for Robert Wise, who stepped in late in 1963 to pick up the pieces and steer the production forward.